intention on axing the carbon tax like the Conservatives want? Are you going to back down?
No, we're not axing the tax.
We're not axing the tax, he says. Some scenes of overnight voting in the House of Commons, MPs fast approaching the 24-hour mark in this ongoing vote-a-thon, a legislative filibuster forced by the Conservatives over the Trudeau government's carbon tax. High drama, vote by vote. Is it fair strategy or political stunt? One group keen watching all of this unfold, our Friday front bench, and let's bring them in. Karleen Verheyen, former Chief of Staff to the late Liberal Cabinet Minister Jim Carr. She's an Associate Vice President at Sima Strategies. Melanie Paradis was the communications director for former Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, now the president of Texture Communications. Let's bring him in. Former Ontario NDP MPP Guradan Singh, now vice president at Crestview Strategy, brother of federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, and our very own senior digital parliamentary reporter Rachel Aiello is joining us from our studios in Ottawa. Karleen, let me start with you. MPs, a little sleep-deprived. Liberal MP Kevin Lamoureux was on the panel earlier on the show. He actually was voting on his smartphone as he was talking to us here. What do you think about what we're seeing?
I mean, I gotta say, this is sort of the political equivalent of a cafeteria school food fight going on at a time when there's a lot of really important business that Parliament should be considering. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have unveiled this tactic that I think Mr. Poilievre thinks makes him out to be some sort of a political chess master, but in reality is kind of backfiring for them. I mean, what's happening right now in the Commons, just a few hundred meters from here, is you have the Conservative leader and his party actually putting their names down on the record, voting against things that most Canadians would feel are pretty important to them. Things like raises for members of Canada's armed forces, things like military aid for Ukraine, things like help for farmers who are struggling. So while it may be a stunt that sounds good in theory, I don't think it's really panning out in any meaningfully politically impactful way for the Conservatives. It looks juvenile and frankly it looks out of touch for most Canadian families who have bigger priorities on their mind at this time of year.
To you, Melanie, and just in reference to that Ukrainian funding situation the Conservatives have voted against, we do have a comment from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress that we're going to bring up, basically saying that this issue should be beyond political games. The second time this month, Conservative MPs undermined support for Ukraine by voting against funding for Operation Unifier and other support for Ukraine. Canada's support for Ukraine should be unanimous and, again, beyond political games. Your read on what we're seeing here. Political tricks, smart move. What's your take?
So first of all, these sort of shenanigans happen every single year around this time, and they're conducted by every party. It doesn't matter who's in government. This sort of thing happens all the time. It's just a tactic in order to get a message across. And I think that the key difference this time around is that Pierre Poilievre is totally winning the messaging war here. It's really clear that he's doing this just because of the carbon tax. He's trying to get relief for, they've introduced an opposition motion yesterday that would exempt the carbon tax for families, for First Nations communities, other Indigenous communities, and for farmers. And that was voted against by the NDP and the Liberals. They also have C-234, which is before the Senate right now. And that's the bill that will provide some relief for farmers with the carbon tax. So we would exempt some farming activities from that. And they really need that exemption. So all of these tactics are to get the carbon tax exemption for farmers and for others. And I think that message is ringing loud and clear from Pierre's team. I think that the average Canadian doesn't understand what all these tactics are and probably doesn't care, but they do understand that they want the carbon tax to be gone and that Pierre Poilievre is the only one who's fighting for that.
Guradan, you've been a politician. Your read.
You said it best. I've heard the words dramatic, shenanigans, performative. That's really what we're seeing right now. This is actually not the Conservatives right now are actually not demonstrating what a government in waiting should be like. They're demonstrating what drama is like when it unfolds and takes center stage at a really important time. The Conservatives are voting against fundamental functioning of our government that pertains to armed services, to our correctional facilities. They're going to now be on record having voted against, when we talk about voting records right now, the Conservatives have put themselves in a terrible, terrible corner where they're voting against the very function of the government. So this is demonstrating how the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre specifically are more concerned with their YouTube videos that they make afterwards, as opposed to actually fighting for real issues that will help Canadians. It's clear in their dramatic shenanigans that they're putting forth right now, and it's really not becoming of a political party that's actually wanting to lead this government and this country to the place it needs to be.
Richard Aiello, I know you've got your popcorn out watching this all-nighter, now all-dayer. Silly or serious? What do you think?
I think it depends where you land on the political spectrum. These kind of end of session things are kind of like Rorschach tests for where you are politically. If you are supporting the government, you think this is a waste of time, and you do, as the Liberals have done all day long, point out all of the various things the Conservatives have been voting against. If you're in opposition and feeling like, why not throw every tool in the kitchen sink at the government to try to get your way across, then this is just another way to do that. I will just update folks, I checked in before we started. We're about 24 hours into this and on vote 109. So it does look like there still is probably at least a couple hours left this evening. Which will mean MPs maybe pulling a long weekend in Ottawa or have very long trips home on very little sleep ahead of them. Ultimately, so far, none of the government's spending measures have failed. So the ultimate practice or purpose of this, of having the government repeal the carbon tax, we heard it from the Prime Minister off the top of this, it's not going to happen.
Carleen, back to you. This is about sending a message on the carbon tax. The filibuster is a tactic. It's been used by other parties, including the Liberals. So what's the problem here?
If it were being used as a negotiation tactic where there was a genuine desire by the opposition Conservatives to achieve some policy outcome, I think we'd be having a different conversation. But what we know here is that the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, has stated publicly many times over the last 24, 36 hours, we are doing this until the Liberals promise to wind down the price on pollution. That's never going to happen. Pierre Poilievre knows it. The Conservative caucus in the House of Commons knows it. Everybody knows that at this point, 8 years into the Liberal government's term in office and Justin Trudeau's prime ministership, there is absolutely no chance that the price on pollution is going to be unwound or removed. And in fact, it's something that a majority of Canadians support. So the notion that that these marathon votes are going to do anything to meaningfully achieve that policy outcome are pretty disingenuous. I think that Conservative Canadians who want to see Pierre Poilievre doing things and making inroads on their behalf and seeing policy outcomes they actually care about are going to be a little bit disappointed by what is essentially a stunt that may generate a few headlines, but will be forgotten about largely within the next 2 or 3 days.
Melanie, I know that some Liberals, including the House Leader Karina Gould, have said that this is nothing more than the importation of extreme Republican hard-right tactics into our country by Pierre Poilievre. Your counter-argument to that?
So look, I just want to address first and foremost that the carbon tax has already been exempt for oil home heating, largely so that the Liberals could shore up their support in Atlantic Canada. They've blinked on the carbon tax already. So absolutely, there's an opportunity for them to roll it back for other areas, for other people and Canadians who need that. So that's why Pierre Poilievre is fighting for this, because he knows that there is an opening here. There's an opportunity. The Liberals have demonstrated that they're willing to roll back the carbon tax for some people. So why not push for more people to get that relief? That's what this is all about, is fighting for Canadians to get the relief that they need right now.
And what about the importation of hard-right politics?
I don't think that these tactics are in any way an importation from anywhere. These are tactics that we've seen deployed here in Canada by every political party, in every legislature and in Parliament throughout the years. And the previous government has done this. This government, the Liberals did this when Harper was in power. This is just par for the course.
Garatin, your take.
I think there is something to be said about the hardship that Pierre Poilievre has taken to catering to the more extreme right-wing components within the Conservative Party. We've seen that with his anti-science rhetoric. We've seen that with his positions against healthcare policy. And we're seeing that with the politicization and his attack on the environment. We know that we've seen firsthand the devastation that the climate crisis is having across the world, including here in Canada. It's like we all of a sudden forget the fact that the vast majority of Canada was covered in plumes of smoke from all the forest fires just a couple of months ago. And now we have this unscientific position to roll back, protections or policies that are going to help reduce the impact of the climate crisis. It is, I think, concerning what we're seeing from the Conservatives, especially under Pierre Poilievre's leadership. And it's something that I think we saw clearly other Conservatives speak against. Mr. O'Toole, and when he left his position, sent a very solemn message to the Conservative Party to say, stay the course, choose a more reasonable approach, and don't give in to these more far right-wing policies and approach towards politics.
But last word to you on this, Rachel. Clearly, the Conservatives believe their message is resonating, this whole idea of doubling down on axing the carbon tax.
Yes, and it sounds like, Todd, what we're watching unfold overnight and into today is not going to be the end of it. While, yes, these votes will happen, MPs will take their weekends, we still have one more week of the House sitting. And if Poilievre really wants to make good on his plans to ruin the Prime Minister's holidays, while he can't extend the House sitting past when they're supposed to rise, there still are a number of days left where the Liberals are really now feeling the crunch to get their legislation through. And the Conservatives are likely looking at what other levers they can pull to make that process as slow and painful as possible.
All right, we'll see how that plays out. Coming up,